Loading icon. We are live.
Correct.
Welcome to another episode of Share Friday. This week we've got Ben Scholtz, and he's going to walk us through some Elixir stuff. So Ben, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I've been using Elixir since the beginning of this year on a few freelance projects, and I've fallen in love with it. It's a great development framework and community, and hopefully I'll teach you all a few things and get you on board.
Cool. Nice, exciting. So is this quite a new language? I'm guessing it's, if you've only started it at the beginning of the year, it's not like, Fortran. It's quite a new thing.
So it's based on Erlang, which has been around for a long time. And so I guess, I'll give a bit of the history of the language. So Erlang was originally used for networking for telecoms. It was built by Ericsson. And I'm not quite sure of the year, but I assume that it's sort of 90s, 80s. And so it was intended to be a language that was very fault tolerant, could handle sort of concurrent processing of hundreds and thousands of calls in a sort of call center. And those properties were used in the Elixir language, but Elixir is intended to be a bit more developer friendly. It's adopted a lot of the great things about Ruby. So things like the MVC model view controller model. And let me give you a show. Yeah. So, okay, let me try to share my screen.
I think Denham's got the admin mode, so he'll add you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I think you have to initiate the share screen, and then I'll put
cool.
your face up.
Try now.
All right, there we go. And there we go. Cool.
Nice.
Hey, Sean.
Hey guys.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So Elixir is based on Erlang, and there are a number of go for it.
Quick request. Can you make it a little bit bigger to see?
Sure. Let me zoom in.
Go to optometrist at some point.
Cool. Yeah, so Erlang they have a standard library called the Open Telecom Platform, which provides a number of libraries that introduce things like great fault tolerance, distribution of processes, reliability. And Elixir was built on top of Erlang in about 2011. So let's have a look at the Elixir page. Okay, so one of the great features of Elixir is that you have a sort of actor model where you communicate between very lightweight processes, and these processes can send messages between each other. And WhatsApp and I think Discord as well have both adopted Elixir and Erlang in various forms to enable them to scale to the size that they are today. So another thing that Elixir and Erlang share in common is that they have great fault tolerance. And the way they do this is that any sort of application that you spin up and start is supervised. And if that application crashes, you have different ways to recover from those crashes. And it's also a sort of purely functional programming language. And you've got a number of great features that you'll get in similar functional programming languages, such as pattern matching. And let me see.
And what's is there quite a big syntax difference between Erlang and Elixir? Or is it completely different languages in syntax, or is it kind of a little bit similar? And is Elixir a little bit more user-friendly?
Yeah, so Elixir is a lot more user-friendly. If you're coming from the Ruby on Rails or the Ruby background, you'll be very familiar with the syntax. So one of the frameworks that's built on top of Elixir for web development is called Phoenix, and Rails is sort of the equivalent for Ruby. So the syntax is very similar, but Erlang is completely different. It's shares a lot of the underlying sort of standard libraries, but the syntax is quite different.
And there's no like front-end development framework in Erlang, I'm guessing, or nothing like Phoenix.
Possibly, not that I know of. I haven't really dug into too deep into Erlang. So if you pick up Elixir, there are a number of sort of concepts that are shared between Elixir and Erlang, but you don't really need to dig much into Erlang to understand Elixir. So I think, Phoenix is the reason that I picked up Elixir originally. It's a server-side rendered language. They use WebSockets for very fast, efficient updates of front-end web apps. And as an example, the recent application I worked on didn't have to touch a single line of JavaScript, which was a sort of really great developer experience. So it's basically a MVC framework where you've got a template language on the back end, which calculates sort of the diffs between as you update data on the back end, it calculates a diff and sends it through to the front end. And all of this.
So Ben, if someone wanted to get started using Elixir, would you recommend they get involved with the framework like Phoenix and try just, spin up a basic project? Or what would you say is like the first steps to get involved in this beautiful language?
Yeah, I would say Phoenix is a great start. Once you are familiar with the syntax and some of the basic standard libraries, I think you can very quickly start using Phoenix. But I also think, I found I could become very productive in Elixir very quickly. The syntax is very clean and simple. I think Ruby was built for the same reasons. It was meant to create really great developer experience. And I think within a week or two, you could be familiar with just about everything you need to know in Elixir and become immediately productive.
That's awesome. Very cool.
A quick question. You mentioned that it's pure, which basically means values are immutable. Is there like an escape hatch, or is it impossible to mutate values?
Yeah, so you can't mutate values. The basic idea is that you would manage state through some other process. One of the options is something called a gen server, which is used quite a lot. In fact, Phoenix templates and themselves are gen servers. So basically, it's a way of sending messages between processes, maintaining some form of state. And it's also one of the reasons that Elixir is not a great option for very sort of mathematically intensive processes, because one of the downsides of having immutability is that you've got to continuously recreate those values as you go. So I've got a example application here that I've been working on, and this is basically an ETL pipeline which takes data from Google Sheets and extracts the data, transforms it into some sort of more clean, usable format, and loads it into a database, Postgres in this case. And all of the interactivity that you see here, none of it is done client-side. So I think there's probably about 10 lines of code to sort of set up your WebSocket. And all of the other sort of live interactivity here, like search is a great example of it, because you can see it being live updated as you change values here. All of this is being pushed through very efficiently via WebSockets. And if you follow the Phoenix framework on Twitter, you'll see that every day they're sort of making this diffing process more and more efficient.
So in this scenario, everything's kind of done in the back end. There's very minimal done in the front end.
Yeah. And
I feel like there's quite a few projects that are trying to push a lot of moving stuff into the front end. But what are some of the benefits of keeping all the logic in the back end just much faster?
Yeah, so it's potentially much faster, but also your code is all in a single language and framework, which means that you don't have to context switch between the data that you are processing and dealing with and how you display it. So just to give an example of what a Phoenix framework page looks like. In fact, this is live view, which is built on top of Phoenix. But I'll show you later what live view is exactly. Basically, you've got this templating language, which allows you to insert Elixir code inside what looks like basic HTML and CSS. And you have different hooks through to the front end, which enable you to send messages bidirectionally between the front end and the back end via WebSockets. And so you've got some basic methods here, like when it mounts, what do? You can set your initial state, and then when someone goes and selects a tab, you receive an event on the back end, and you can process that event and patch the front end state. And so every single time you update one of these variables, which is accessed in this template, your front end will immediately update to sort of display that new data.
So then a few minutes ago, you were typing stuff and it was filtering like instantaneously. Is that data coming back from the back end, or is all the data living in the browser and then the front end code is filtering it out?
So the data lives in the back end, and any diff between the data that's on the back end and what's being displayed on the front end is sent through the WebSocket. So yeah, I mean, the data obviously has to be on the front end in some form to be able to display it. But as soon as you make a small change, if you, for example, add an element onto an array that's displayed on the front end in a list, it will only send the new element, which makes it sort of very fast and efficient.
Okay, so if you go and look at the network calls, it's like every character you type when you're trying to add a filter, that would be a network call.
Potentially. So there's some debouncing and different ways you can manage that to make it more efficient. But yeah.
So I mean, I guess a trade-off between doing things more server-side and more client-side is how much processing happens on the server. I mean, the beauty of like React, especially why it became popular, is you can make quite a big interactive website and almost pay zero for hosting, because you just need a CDN to store those JavaScript files. Whereas server-side processing, obviously, the more, like, if you double the number of users you have, you double the processing requirements of your server effectively, which is quite dangerous. But if I understand correctly, because Elixir is immutable, and because you have like these threads that are all sort of independent, it's much easier to scale. Could you sort of talk more about that? I think that could be interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, if you compare it to your sort of basic lightweight React application, you could definitely get away with a lot less complexity. But I think, so Elixir and Erlang work with a model which allows you to very easily distribute your processing and deployment. So, for an example, an application where you might have usually had to set up some sort of container orchestration like Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, with Erlang, or Elixir and Erlang, that ability is built into the system. So if you have a look here, you can select. So this is a dashboard for everything that's going on in Elixir and Phoenix. So you can basically create 1, 2, 3 nodes, all communicating with each other, distributed across different cloud infrastructures. And I think, let me see, how can I explain this? Yeah, so obviously Elixir by itself can scale very easily because of the concurrency with the sort of concurrent processes. And so I think you will not struggle to handle the load of multiple users on your server. I think at a certain point, it will become more reasonable to deploy a application with Phoenix than it would to use React, especially once the sort of client-side operations become too much to, for example, run on a mobile phone. I think a lot of mobile phones these days are very powerful and you can do a lot of client-side processing, but it's usually better to sort of, for more complex applications, to offload that to the server. Yeah. So Phoenix by itself is purely a server-side web framework. And Phoenix Live View is a library that was built on top of the Phoenix framework that enables the sort of efficient patching of front-end code like you saw earlier. What's happening there?
And I think, if I understand correctly, a lot of these sort of superpowers that you're talking about come from it being pure, because basically you know that there's not going to be a side effect from one component to another that causes some unexpected race condition or whatever. So if you need to scale it out to many different threads, you have that guarantee that the data isn't going to mutate. It's only going to update,
For sure. Yeah, I think in general, that's why functional programming languages are a lot more predictable about how they can run concurrently and scale, which is definitely, one of the features that it's relying on. So,
okay, so go for it. No, I'll ask later.
Cool. So this is basically an idea of how the sort of Elixir supervisor model allows you to scale, and how WhatsApp, for example, uses Elixir to be able to scale. So in the case that I showed here, you've got a single application that's being deployed. But as soon as your user base grows, anywhere past a couple of thousand users, you will eventually maybe want to deploy different instances of the application, maybe for different user groups. And the sort of controller sort of model allows you to communicate between those different deployments. And within each application deployment, you also have a supervisor, which enables you to separate your application into different components and make sure that if there is a failure in a single part of your application, it doesn't bring down the entire application, which I think is something very powerful that's built in by default. With other applications like maybe Node.js, if you have an API that crashes and you haven't properly managed the sort of recovery process for that, you're not guaranteed of having a very robust application.
Would that setup be on a single instance, like either a container or an actual server, or is the application controller its own server, and then you have different nodes and their own supervisors?
So you could, yeah, you could deploy it on a single instance, but the application node or the different nodes can communicate via whatever networking you provide it. So essentially, if you have a process on a specific node, you would be able to access that process by the node host name and particular IP that you open up, or the port that you open up, and the name of the specific process that you want to communicate with, because everything is based on these sort of lightweight processes and messages sent between them. The same applies once you start scaling horizontally, I guess, with multiple deployments of different nodes. So Elixir is also starting to be used in IoT, and I think this is quite an exciting project. Coming from an engineering background, it was great to see that there is some application of Elixir in IoT devices. So Nerves takes this actor model, which applies really nicely to the sort of usual IoT setup where you've got multiple lightweight sort of IoT devices communicating between each other, and Nerves, it's a framework for that you could install or deploy on the Raspberry Pi or whatever small Linux machine you want to.
Ben, do you mind sharing this the GitHub link of the overview doc with me, or maybe just somewhere and I can add it to the YouTube description or comment?
Cool, I'll post it here for you. Cool. So yeah, I think the developer community for Elixir is also really, really great. They've got a number of different learning resources. They've also got people building applications like this on top of Phoenix and Phoenix Live View. So I think this has stopped working now. Anyway, this is being deployed from my computer back at home. So I think I think my SSH connection is down. Okay. What else can I show you? So yeah, Elixir is used in a number of large-scale companies like WhatsApp and Discord. It's also quite extensively used in fintech applications. Also included an app sort of example here of how Discord uses Elixir with communication port through to Rust to enable to scale. And so Erlang was meant for sort of telecoms, as a telecoms framework, and they've got a number of different ways to communicate with different programming languages to make it more powerful, because Elixir and Erlang by themselves are not necessarily the best languages to use for certain tasks like mathematics and computationally intensive tasks, but they are great for managing different processes. So if you spin up a Elixir process that can communicate to Python or Rust, it sort of makes it a bit more powerful.
Ben, we have a question. Do you mind if I pop it up?
Cool, for sure.
So Florian says, how has support been within the community? It's all quite new, and I imagine Stack Overflow is a bit sparse. Classic problem. When you run into a problem, do you find help easily to remove blockers?
Yeah, so I think to kind of show you an example, I can take you to a pretty popular Elixir library called Flow, which allows you to do sort of parallel processing of tasks on Elixir. And Elixir something that Elixir has also added on top of Erlang is a very good documentation framework. So most libraries that you come across will have very good documentation. And I think that's definitely not true of all programming languages. But you're right that Stack Overflow is not the sort of the go-to place for Elixir and asking and answering Elixir questions. Usually it's either the Elixir forum, and I think all programming languages tend to have a certain you can tell whether the community is very helpful or not, and I think I found Elixir to be incredibly helpful. It's a very new language, which means that everyone is constantly learning and building on top of Elixir, and they're very approachable. So I would say the Elixir forum is probably the best place to start with any questions you might have.
I've got a question about the sort of dynamic nature of Elixir. So I've tried Elixir, but very, very briefly. And it's dynamic in that you don't explicitly type anything, and there aren't compile time sort of type checks that I saw, but there are sort of some aspects of a type system that I noticed. I'm being very vague because I don't actually remember the details, but maybe you can elaborate.
Yeah, for sure. I remember coming across a post in the Elixir forum sort of discussing the pros and cons of languages like Haskell and Elixir and OCaml, and discussing things like the type systems that they all use. And Elixir has chosen a very quick to learn, approachable syntax. It's a very powerful syntax because of a lot of the functional sort of things they've built on top of it. But yeah, there are options for doing compile time checking, but they are not built into the language. But there are options to do type checking. Can't remember offhand what the library is called.
I actually remembered seeing a tweet by, I don't know who exactly, some sort of lead engineer or something like that at WhatsApp that was saying they were looking at building a type system for Elixir, which, sounded pretty interesting. And I think that was quite recent also.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think there are a lot of people talking about it. Yeah.
I have a question, but I'll wait until. So cool. Is this essentially saying that there are some type support for, this is like the TypeScript of Elixir, type safe?
So there are libraries that allow you to kind of write type specifications, which will then be checked. But it's called Dialyzer. So you would run this as part of your build process, and it would sort of outline any issues with your types. And it's a very powerful framework, but I haven't found myself using it yet, to be honest. I think, it's there if you need it, but yeah.
Cool. I have a question, and I've typed it out just so I can make it pop up. But if you want to learn Elixir, knowing what you know now, where would you start? Are there any specific resources? Is there maybe a Discord that you can recommend joining?
Yeah, I would definitely say the Elixir forum is the best place for sort of interacting with the community. I would say the Phoenix framework is probably the best place as a sort of web developer to quickly become familiar with not only Elixir, but also the standard sort of web app development framework. Phoenix also has very good documentation that will help you become familiar with Elixir. But yeah, also the Elixir guides and documentation, I would say, is a good starting point.
So this is a tough question, I guess. But what would you say Elixir really isn't suitable for in the web? So you've mentioned computationally intensive things. But if I were to build a website, when would you say don't use Phoenix? Can you think of anything?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can give some examples. So far, I've used Phoenix and Phoenix Live View for everything from my personal blog and website, which honestly, I only did that because I wanted to learn Phoenix. But the experience was very, very pleasant. I would do it again. But I do think it's probably overkill for things like for websites that could be static or client-side, for client-side sort of interactivity. I think as soon as you start needing things like a Node.js backend for sort of processing of your data, then it starts becoming more reasonable to start looking at Elixir and Phoenix. I mean, I've built a few small libraries using Elixir and quickly found that it wasn't suitable for the application that I had chosen. So in this case, I don't know if any of you are in the sort of token engineering space, you'll know about CAD. I attempted to kind of port some of the Python code across into Elixir, and it was a lot slower than the Python equivalent, despite the sort of concurrency, because of its limitations with handling floats and sort of mathematical calculations.
Then another question I have, you say that you actually aren't writing any JavaScript in your Phoenix apps, like the consulting work that you're doing, and etc. How easy is it to integrate JavaScript and do in JavaScript, people go on about isomorphic web apps, so it's like server-side rendered, but the same code runs on server and front end. And sometimes that's really beneficial. You don't want to have to wait for any server request, even if it's really fast. How would you integrate React, for example, with Phoenix?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I would say first of all that Phoenix Live View, in a lot of cases, is incredibly fast and efficient. There's been a number of applications have been moving across to Phoenix Live View and found big performance improvements. If you do want to use JavaScript, you definitely can. So I think the only case where I've used JavaScript in this case is actually for displaying charts and graphs on the front end. So there are some library. This is actually one of the limitations I hit with this consulting work, is that I want to just display fairly complex charts, and there are options to render SVG charts, which would allow you to sort of generate that SVG on the back end and send it through to the front end. But otherwise, you would have to use something called hooks. So if we have a look at the JavaScript code here, a hook is basically, so here you can see the definition of hooks. We've got a sort of set of progress bars, as well as this is the chart component for the front end. So it's very basic sort of JavaScript, making use of, I think it's uplot. And then these hooks that you define have different sort of stages, when the component is mounted, when data is updated, and this hook would be from your backend. It would call these hooks at different stages and update the data, and so it doesn't add that much more code. but it allows you to use JavaScript when you need to.
Okay, that makes sense. But that JavaScript look, at least from what I see, it's very isolated. You have to define very specific interaction points via these hooks, and you wouldn't be able to like do a sort of big mishmash of like React and Phoenix without some sort of frustration, I guess, on defining these hooks. It doesn't seem like they communicate that smoothly.
Yeah.
At least from what I see here.
So, for example, if you used Phoenix without the templating and had a React front end, you could do that and simply use your Phoenix, because Phoenix is a web framework which comes along with model view controller, but you can remove the view and use React in place of that, and simply use Elixir and Phoenix as an API, in which case you would be replacing, I guess, Node. But I think it's not sort of its most powerful using it in that setup. So I think something else that I really enjoyed developing with Elixir is that the testing framework is very well built into the Phoenix and Elixir framework. So all your tests are very clean, and yeah, it provides you a very powerful testing framework right out the box. And I think with other applications like JavaScript and whatever else you may choose, there's often sort of an overload of choices, whereas with Elixir, the sort of standard libraries and test and frameworks are very well made, and I think that's just the result of it being a very new language with a very good developer community.
And what do you think the future of Elixir is? What do you think Elixir will be like in 10 years? Is it changing a lot still? Or is it mostly the libraries very established and it'll be new libraries? I don't know if you have any ideas or insights.
So I think that's kind of the beauty of Elixir as well, is that it's built on a tried and tested base, which is Erlang. So the actual operation of the Erlang model is incredibly robust. There's not too much that changes. I mean, they are still updating Erlang, but it's not, you've got Elixir on the one hand, which is a very new language with great features and very clean, easily developer-friendly syntax, and is moving very quickly. But the things you care about, which is how robust and stable your application are all sort of built on top of Erlang, which gives you that sort of peace of mind. I think that you probably find it'll keep moving in this direction, where Phoenix and Phoenix Live View and all the libraries and frameworks that are built on top of Elixir and Erlang will move very quickly, keep up to date with the times, and provide all these powerful features that you enjoy using, while at the same time having that stable bedrock of Erlang.
Yeah, I think this is sort of a personal opinion, but a lot of new languages are coming out nowadays, much more than ever before. But it's also very difficult to actually build a language from scratch. So typically you'd want to build on something else that has, a testing framework. Otherwise you have to build 100 things all at the same time just to make a language. Like no one wants to use a language that you can't be used in multiple domains or whatever. So I'm quite active in the Reason ML community, and they've basically just taken the compiler from OCaml and put on a new face, and Because of that, they had a lot of strength at the beginning. From day one, they were already really far ahead of any other new languages. But they still have the flexibility to experiment because they are a new language. So yeah, I think that's going to be a pattern. I think it'll be very, very difficult for brand new languages to just pop up and be competitive.
Yeah. I think one of the things I loved about Elixir and Erlang as well is that, I do a lot of DevOps. I come from a sort of DevOps background as well, and Elixir and Erlang provide a very strong framework for your application infrastructure as well to build on top of. I think I remember them when there was a thread comparing things like OCaml, Haskell, and Elixir, and all the different type systems and all the rest. The one thing they were asking is, why has Elixir become so popular, or Elixir and Erlang, why have they become so popular, and why are they used so extensively in applications like WhatsApp, Discord, a number of sort of financial companies? And I think the reason they said was that it's a very powerful, stable framework, but it also just gets out of your way and allows you to build sort of business logic and solve problems. Whereas a lot of other languages, there are steep learning curves. I think you can very quickly become productive in Elixir, and so it's very well suited to a number of distributed applications like WhatsApp and Discord. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask? Otherwise, I think good. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it hugely.
Cool.
Gonna do some more digging. All right. Thanks, guys. Doesn't seem like there are any more questions. Or John, do you want to say something?
No, I think we sorted, eh? I think we are flipping sorted. I think we're going to do another juicy Tech Friday next week, eh? Thank you so much, Ben. And if anyone has got some sick suggestions for more epic tech things to bite into, smash them in the chat. I can see the chat's going wild there already. Thanks, Florian. So, yeah, let us know.
I know Flo, who was on this call, who's on this call. I've taken through a few. I think got him on board Elixir after having left software development for quite a while, and I think he loved it. He's got a background in Ruby as well. So if anyone wants sort of one-on-one, onboarding, I can help them out.
Everyone hear that? Hey? Free lessons.
That sounds great.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right, cool, guys. Thanks for today, and see you again next week.
Cool.
Elixir over Ruby.
See you guys.
Ciao, guys.